The radar screen flickered to life aboard the USS America. Lieutenant Zoe Mitchell's hands trembled as she adjusted the F-35's complex avionics system. 6 months ago, she was fixing tractors on her family's Montana ranch. Now, enemy aircraft were closing fast on their position, and the seasoned pilots around her were counting on the rookie farm girl they'd barely acknowledged. Everything she'd trained for led to this moment. The morning sun painted the Montana sky orange and pink as Zoe Mitchell climbed down from the old John Deere tractor. She wiped grease from her hands on her jeans and looked up at the contrail cutting across the endless blue above their ranch. Another F-35, she said to herself, shading her eyes with one hand. The white line stretched from horizon to horizon, perfectly straight. Her father walked over from the barn, carrying a toolbox. You can tell that from way up there? Twin engines, high altitude, straight line toward Malmstrom Air Force Base. Has to be military. Zoe pulled her phone out and checked the flight tracking app she downloaded. Yep. Lightning too. Dad shook his head and smiled. 24 years old and you still track every plane that flies over. Some habits don't die. They walked back toward the house together, boots crunching on the gravel driveway. Mom was hanging laundry on the line behind the kitchen, white sheets snapping in the wind. Zoe, phone's ringing inside, she called out. Sounds official. Zoe's stomach flipped. She'd been waiting for this call for 3 months. She ran up the porch steps and grabbed the kitchen phone. Lieutenant Mitchell speaking. Mitchell, this is Major Collins from personnel. Your deployment orders came through. USS America, Pacific Fleet. Report to Travis Air Force Base Monday morning at 0600. The kitchen went quiet except for the old clock ticking above the stove. Mom had stopped hanging laundry. Dad stood in the doorway. Yes, sir. I'll be there. Good luck, Lieutenant. They need good avionics specialists out there. The line went dead. Zoe hung up and turned around. Her parents stared at her. Well? Dad asked. I ship out Monday. Aircraft carrier in the South China Sea. Mom sat down hard in her chair. That's 5 days away. I know. Dad walked over and put his arm around Mom's shoulders. We knew this day would come, Beth. That evening, Zoe sat in her old bedroom, packing her duffel bag. The walls still had her high school science fair ribbons and a poster of the State Route 71 Blackbird. Her laptop sat open on the desk, showing technical manuals for F-35 avionics systems. She'd studied these pages hundreds of times, but they felt different now. Real. Mom knocked on the door frame. Can I come in? Sure. Mom sat on the edge of the bed and picked up Zoe's Air Force Academy graduation photo. You look so serious in this picture. I was terrified. For years of studying, and I still wasn't sure I belonged there. You graduated third in your class. I know. But everyone else seemed to know things I didn't. Like they were born for this. Zoe folded her flight suit and laid it carefully in the bag. Sometimes I wonder if I should have just stayed here. Taken over the ranch. Mom set the photo down. Your great-grandmother left Norway with nothing but a suitcase and a dream. She homesteaded this land when women weren't supposed to do such things. You think she was scared? Probably. She did it anyway. That's what our family does. Sunday afternoon, Dad drove her to the small airport in Billings. Her duffel bag sat in the truck bed next to a toolbox and some fence wire. They didn't talk much on the drive. At the terminal, Dad helped her carry the bag inside. The place was nearly empty except for a few other military personnel waiting for the same flight to Travis. You call when you can, he said. I will. He hugged her tight. Your mom wanted to come, but you know how she is with goodbyes. Tell her I understand. Dad stepped back and looked at her for a long moment. That little girl who used to lie in the grass and watch planes fly over is about to become one of those pilots she admired. Don't forget that. The boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. Zoe picked up her bag and walked toward the gate. When she turned back, Dad was still standing there, hands in his pockets, watching her go. The plane lifted off over the Yellowstone River, banking east toward the mountains. Through the small window, Zoe could see their ranch getting smaller and smaller until it disappeared into the vast Montana landscape. Soon, she'd trade these endless skies for the cramped quarters of a Navy carrier and the most advanced fighter jet ever built. The USS America stretched out like a floating city, gray metal cutting through dark Pacific waters. Zoe stood on the flight deck, salt spray stinging her face, watching F-35s launch into the morning sky. The roar of jet engines made her ears ring even through her protective gear. "Mitchell!" a voice shouted over the noise. "Get your gear and follow me." She grabbed her duffel bag and hurried after a petty officer toward a hatch marked with yellow warning signs. They descended through narrow corridors that smelled like fuel and metal polish. Everything felt cramped after the wide-open spaces of Montana. "First time on a carrier?" the petty officer asked. "Yes, sir." "You'll get used to it. Or you won't." He stopped at a door marked Squadron Ready Room. "Commander Harrison's waiting." The ready room buzzed with activity. Pilots in flight suits studied mission boards covered with maps and weather data. Navigation charts covered every wall. Zoe walked in and saw a tall man with gray hair turn around. "You must be Mitchell," he said. "I'm Commander Harrison." His handshake was firm, his eyes cold. "So you're our new avionics specialist?" "Yes, sir." "Montana, right? Farm girl?" Heat crept up Zoe's neck. "Ranch, sir. Cattle and wheat." "Same thing." Harrison looked her up and down. "Hope you're ready for the real world out here. This isn't flight school." A woman in a flight suit walked over. She had short blonde hair and moved like she owned the place. "I'm Captain Foster. Call me Ice." She didn't offer her hand. "You'll be working with our electronic systems. Ever seen anything more complex than a tractor radio?" Laughter rippled through the room. Zoe felt every pair of eyes on her. "I graduated third in my avionics class at the academy, ma'am." "Academy's not combat," Ice said. "Out here, mistakes get people killed." A black man about 35 walked up behind Ice. His name tag read Johnson. "I'm Staff Sergeant Johnson. Tech Crew Chief. Don't mind the welcome committee. They're just making sure you're serious." "Thanks," Zoe said quietly. Harrison clapped his hands. "All right, people. Mitchell, you'll bunk with the junior officers. Johnson, get her oriented on the F-35 systems. We've got missions starting tomorrow." The next 3 hours blurred together. Johnson walked her through hangar bays filled with sleek gray fighters. Each F-35 looked identical, but he pointed out tiny differences, scratches, patches, personal markings. "This bird's called Ghost Rider," Johnson said, patting the nose of one plane. "Ice flies her mostly. Temperamental electronics, but she's fast." Zoe ran her hand along the wing edge. The metal felt smooth and warm. "What kind of problems?" "Radar intermittent. Communication glitches. Ice says it's the bird. I think it's pilot error, but don't tell her I said that." "I won't." That evening, Zoe sat in the junior officers' mess hall, picking at her dinner. The meatloaf tasted like cardboard, and the green beans were overcooked. Around her, conversations flowed about missions, equipment, and people she didn't know. 2 pilots sat down at her table without being invited. She recognized them from the ready room. "So, Montana," one said. "What made you think you could handle carrier operations?" "I volunteered," Zoe said. "Volunteered?" The second pilot laughed. "You know what we call volunteers out here? Targets. Leave her alone, Brooks." Johnson appeared with his dinner tray. "She hasn't done anything to you." Brooks shrugged. "Just curious why someone would leave paradise for this floating prison." After Brooks left, Johnson sat down across from Zoe. "Don't let them get to you. They do this to everyone new." How long does it last? Depends. Until you prove yourself, mostly. And how do I do that? Johnson stabbed his meatloaf with his fork. Same way everyone does. Do your job better than they expect. That night, Zoe lay in her narrow bunk, listening to the ship's engines humming through the hull. Her roommate, Lieutenant Davis, had introduced herself with a grunt and immediately put in earbuds. The woman in the bunk above snored softly. Zoe pulled out her phone and started writing an email to her parents, then stopped. What could she tell them? That she felt like a fraud? That everyone here seemed to know secrets she'd never learned? She deleted the draft and put the phone away. The next morning brought her first real mission briefing. Zoe sat in the back of the ready room while Harrison pointed to a map on the big screen. Reconnaissance flight over the Spratly Islands. Intelligence reports increased Chinese naval activity. We need eyes on their positions. Ice raised her hand. What about electronic countermeasures? Expect jamming. Standard protocols. Harrison's eyes found Zoe in the back row. Mitchell, you'll fly with Lieutenant Parker in the two-seater. Observer position. Try to keep up. More laughter from the pilots. Zoe nodded, her mouth dry. After the briefing, she walked to the bathroom and splashed cold water on her face. In the mirror, she looked young and scared. Back home, she'd fixed every piece of electronic equipment on a 1,000-acre ranch. Here, she felt like she didn't know anything. The announcement came over the ship's intercom, flight operations commencing. All personnel clear the flight deck. Zoe took a deep breath, straightened her flight suit, and headed for the hangar bay. Time to find out if 4 years at the Air Force Academy and a lifetime of fixing things had prepared her for this. Outside, the Pacific stretched endlessly in every direction, and somewhere out there, people who wanted to kill them were waiting. The F-35's engines screamed as Lieutenant Parker taxied toward the catapult. Zoe sat in the back seat, checking her instruments for the third time. Her stomach churned with each roll of the carrier deck. You okay back there, Montana? Parker's voice crackled through the intercom. Fine, sir. Zoe gripped her harness straps. She'd done carrier training simulations, but the real thing felt different. Bigger. More violent. First cat shot's always interesting. Just breathe through it. The catapult officer gave the signal. Zoe felt the plane lurch forward, then slam her back into her seat as they accelerated from 0 to 150 miles per hour in 2 seconds. Her vision grayed at the edges. Then they were flying, climbing into blue sky above an ocean that stretched forever. The carrier shrank to a dot behind them. Welcome to the Pacific Theater, Parker said. See that haze on the horizon? That's where things get interesting. They flew southeast for 20 minutes, staying at medium altitude. Zoe monitored the electronic warfare systems, watching for enemy radar sweeps. The screens showed normal patterns at first: commercial shipping, weather radar, routine military communications. Contact bearing 270, Parker announced. Chinese destroyer, probably Type 055. Zoe adjusted her sensors and immediately felt sick. Not from the flying, but from the instruments. Numbers flickered and jumped across her displays. Static filled her earphones. Sir, I'm getting heavy jamming on all frequencies. Roger that. They know we're here. The next hour tested everything Zoe had learned. Enemy jamming created false targets on her radar. Radio communications cut in and out. Her navigation system lost satellite lock twice. She fought waves of nausea as the plane banked and turned, following Parker's evasive maneuvers. But slowly, patterns emerged. The jamming wasn't random. It pulsed in 15-second cycles, strongest during the middle 10 seconds of each pulse. During the weak periods, Zoe could get clear readings. Sir, the interference has gaps. Every 15 seconds, there's a 5-second window of clear signal. You sure about that? Zoe watched her instruments for another full minute. Positive. They're cycling their jammers to avoid overheating. Good catch. Command, this is Viper 2-1. Jamming is cyclic, 15-second intervals. Clear windows at seconds 1 through 5 of each cycle. They completed their reconnaissance and turned for home. Zoe had filled 2 notebooks with signal patterns and electronic signatures. Her hands were steady now, her stomach settled. Not bad for a farm girl, Parker said as they approached the carrier. You kept up better than most rookies. The carrier landing hit like a controlled crash. Zoe's teeth rattled as the tailhook caught the arresting cable, throwing them both forward against their harnesses. Then they were down, engines winding down, safe. In the debrief room, Zoe sat quietly while Parker reported their findings to Commander Harrison and the intelligence officer. She noticed Harrison writing notes when Parker mentioned her jamming analysis. Mitchell, Harrison said when Parker finished. Show me your electronic logs. Zoe opened her notebook and spread the pages on the conference table. Her handwriting covered every line, frequencies, power levels, timing intervals, geographic coordinates. She'd recorded everything. Harrison studied the pages for 5 minutes without speaking. Finally, he looked up. This is thorough work. Thank you, sir. Don't let it go to your head. One good flight doesn't make you combat ready. 2 days later, Zoe flew her second mission with ICE and Ghost Rider. This time they escorted a supply convoy through disputed waters near the Paracel Islands. The mission should have been routine. It wasn't. Multiple contacts, bearing 090, ICE announced. For aircraft, probably J-20 fighters. Zoe's threat warning system lit up like a Christmas tree. Enemy radar was painting them from 3 directions. Her electronic countermeasures kicked in automatically, but the Chinese had upgraded their systems since the last intelligence reports. They're burning through our jamming, Zoe said. I can't maintain electronic cover. Then we do this the old-fashioned way. ICE banked hard left, pulling 4GS, hang on. The next 10 minutes blurred together. ICE flew the F-35 like she was born in the cockpit, threading between enemy radar coverage zones that Zoe called out over the intercom. They stayed low, using the Earth's curvature to mask their approach to the convoy. Convoy leader, this is Ghost Rider. We have you on visual. For enemy fighters approaching your position from the northeast. Ghost Rider, we see them. Can you intercept? Zoe checked her displays. The enemy fighters were closing fast, but something was wrong with their formation. They were too spread out, too predictable. ICE, they're not attacking the convoy. They're hurting it. What do you mean? Look at their flight pattern. They're forcing the convoy to turn south, toward those islands. There's probably submarines waiting. ICE studied her tactical display. You're right. Convoy leader, do not alter course. Maintain heading 270. The fighters are trying to drive you into a trap. Ghost Rider, are you certain? Zoe keyed her microphone. Convoy leader, this is Ghost Rider's electronic warfare officer. I'm tracking submarine sonar pings bearing 180, range 12 miles. If you turn south, you'll sail right into them. Silence on the radio for 30 seconds. Then, Roger, Ghost Rider. Maintaining current heading. The enemy fighters realized their plan had failed. They turned away without engaging, disappearing into the haze. On the flight back to the carrier, ICE was quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke over the intercom. How did you know about the submarines? I was monitoring all frequencies, not just the jamming bands. Picked up their active sonar during routine sweeps. The timing matched with the fighter positions. Most people wouldn't have noticed that. I grew up listening to radio chatter. Truckers, ranchers, emergency services. You learn to hear what doesn't belong. That evening in the ready room, word had spread about the convoy mission. Pilots who'd ignored Zoe before nodded when she walked by. Brooks, the pilot who'd called volunteers targets, actually said hello. Johnson found her studying technical manuals at a corner table. Heard you saved the convoy today. ICE did the flying. I just listened to the radio. Don't sell yourself short. Half the pilots in this squadron wouldn't have caught those sonar pings. He sat down across from her. You're starting to fit in around here. Zoe looked around the ready room. The conversation seemed friendlier now, the glances less hostile. But she could still feel the weight of being the new person, the outsider, the one who had to prove herself every single day. It's just one mission, she said. Every mission counts out here, Johnson replied. And the word is already getting around. You've got good ears and a sharp mind. That's exactly what this squadron needs. Outside the porthole, stars reflected on the dark Pacific. Somewhere in that vast ocean, enemy submarines and aircraft were moving through the night, and tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of everything she'd learned. But tonight, for the first time since leaving Montana, Zoe felt like maybe she belonged here after all. Zoe stared at the computer screen in the electronics lab, her eyes burning from 3 hours of data analysis. Numbers filled spreadsheet after spreadsheet, jamming frequencies, power levels, atmospheric conditions, timestamps from every mission in the past month. You're going to ruin your eyesight doing that, Johnson said, walking in with 2 cups of coffee. Thanks. Zoe took the coffee gratefully. Look at this pattern. The enemy jamming gets stronger during certain weather conditions. Johnson pulled up a chair and studied her screen. What kind of conditions? High humidity, specific wind patterns, certain times of day. It's like they know exactly when atmospheric conditions will boost their signal strength. Maybe they just have better equipment than we thought. Or maybe they understand something about signal propagation that we're missing. Zoe scrolled through more data. Back home, we had to deal with radio dead zones during certain weather. Mountains and moisture would block signals in predictable patterns. This ain't Montana, though. It's open ocean. Water vapor acts like terrain sometimes. Creates layers in the atmosphere that bend radio waves. Zoe pulled up a weather map on another monitor. See this? Every time they achieve maximum jamming effectiveness, the atmospheric conditions are identical. Johnson leaned closer. You think they're timing their operations based on weather? I think they're using weather as a force multiplier. Same jamming power, but nature helps them amplify the effect. The lab door opened, and Ice walked in, still wearing her flight suit from the evening patrol. Mitchell, you missed dinner again, she said. I was working on something. Ice looked at the screens covered with charts and graphs. What kind of something? Zoe turned her chair around. I think I know why enemy jamming is getting more effective. They're not just using better technology. They're using better timing. For the next 20 minutes, Zoe walked Ice and Johnson through her analysis. She showed them weather patterns, signal propagation models, and timing correlations that painted a clear picture. So you're saying they wait for perfect atmospheric conditions to launch their electronic attacks? Ice asked. Exactly. Like waiting for the right wind to sail a boat. Same equipment, maximum effectiveness. Ice studied the data for another few minutes. This is good work, Mitchell. Really good. You need to brief the commander on this. You think he'll listen? Only one way to find out. The next morning, Zoe stood in Commander Harrison's office, her laptop open on his desk. Charts and graphs filled the screen, showing 3 weeks of data analysis. So let me understand this, Harrison said. You think the Chinese are timing their jamming operations based on weather forecasts? Yes, sir. The correlation is too strong to be coincidence. Harrison scrolled through her presentation, stopping at a graph showing jamming effectiveness plotted against atmospheric moisture levels. Where did you learn about signal propagation? Mostly self-taught, sir. We had communication problems on the ranch during certain weather patterns. I read technical manuals to understand why. And you think this applies to military electronic warfare? The physics are the same, sir. Radio waves interact with water vapor and atmospheric layers in predictable ways. Harrison closed the laptop and looked at her. Mitchell, this is an interesting theory, But we're dealing with sophisticated military equipment here, not ranch radios. I think you're overthinking this. Sir, if I'm right, we can predict when they'll be most effective and adjust our mission timing accordingly. If you're right. But theories don't win wars, Lieutenant. Results do. Harrison stood up. Focus on your actual duties. Let the intelligence specialists handle strategic analysis. Zoe left the office feeling like she'd been punched in the stomach. In the corridor outside, she nearly ran into Ice. How did it go? Ice asked. He thinks I'm overthinking it. His loss. Come on, we've got a mission briefing. In the ready room, pilots gathered around the main display as the intelligence officer pointed to satellite photos of Chinese naval positions. Enemy activity is increasing near the Spratly Islands. We're seeing more ships, more aircraft, more aggressive electronic warfare. Intelligence suggests they're planning something big. A pilot raised his hand. What about their jamming capabilities? Getting stronger. We're losing communications more frequently, and our electronic countermeasures aren't keeping up. Zoe bit her tongue to keep from speaking. According to her analysis, the Chinese could make their jamming twice as effective just by timing their operations better. But Harrison had made it clear he didn't want to hear her theories. After the briefing, Johnson found her in the corridor. You look like someone stole your dog. Harrison thinks I'm wasting time with weather analysis. Maybe he's wrong. Maybe I am. Johnson stopped walking and grabbed her arm. Listen to me. I've been doing this for 15 years. I've seen a lot of young officers come and go. Most of them follow orders and do their jobs and go home safely. But the ones who make a real difference, they're the ones who see patterns nobody else sees. But what if I'm wrong? Then you're wrong. So what? At least you're thinking. He released her arm. Don't let one conversation with the commander stop you from using your brain. That evening, Zoe sat in her bunk, writing an email to her parents. She told them about her missions, about learning to work with the team, about slowly earning respect. She didn't mention her weather theory or Harrison's dismissal. Her roommate, Lieutenant Davis, looked over from her own bunk. They'd barely spoken since Zoe arrived, but Davis had been listening to the conversation with Johnson earlier. You know, Davis said, my brother's a meteorologist. Works for the National Weather Service. Really? He always says weather prediction is pattern recognition. Most people see chaos, but trained observers see the order underneath. What's your point? Maybe you're seeing something the rest of us are missing. Before Zoe could respond, the ship's intercom crackled to life. General quarters, general quarters. All hands man battle stations. This is not a drill. Red lights flashed in the corridors as sailors ran to their positions. Zoe grabbed her gear and followed Davis toward the ready room, her heart hammering against her ribs. In the ready room, pilots were already suiting up for an emergency scramble. Commander Harrison stood at the main display, which showed radar contacts approaching their position. Large formation of aircraft inbound from the northwest, he announced. Mixed fighters and bombers. ETA 20 minutes. Ice was already in her flight suit. What about electronic warfare support? Expect heavy jamming. All frequencies. Zoe checked the weather data on her phone. High humidity, specific wind patterns, late afternoon timing. According to her analysis, conditions were perfect for maximum jamming effectiveness. The Chinese had timed this attack perfectly. She looked at Harrison, then at Ice, then at the other pilots preparing for the most dangerous mission any of them had ever flown. If she was right about the weather patterns, half these pilots might not come back. If she was wrong, speaking up would end her career. The general quarters alarm kept blaring, and outside, the first F-35s were already launching into an uncertain sky. The flight deck erupted in controlled chaos as F-35s launched one after another into the darkening sky. Zoe ran toward Ghost Rider, where Ice was already running through her pre-flight checklist. Mitchell, you're with me, Ice shouted over the engine noise. Two-seater configuration. I need your eyes on the electronics. Zoe climbed into the back seat, her hands shaking as she strapped herself in. This wasn't a training mission or routine patrol. Enemy bombers were heading straight for the carrier group, and the jamming conditions were perfect for maximum effectiveness. Ghost Rider, this is Tower. You're cleared for immediate launch. Ice advanced the throttles, and they rolled toward the catapult. You ready for this, Montana? As ready as I'll ever be. The catapult shot them off the deck like a bullet. Zoe's vision grayed as they climbed steeply into the evening sky. Below them, the carrier looked like a toy floating on dark water. Ghost Rider flight, this is Overlord. Enemy formation bearing 320, Angels 20, inbound at high speed. Intercept and engage. Ice banked left, following the other F-35s toward the threat. Zoe activated her electronic warfare systems and immediately saw the problem she'd predicted. Ice, jamming is off the charts. I'm getting interference on every frequency. Can you punch through it? Zoe watched her displays flicker and jump. Static filled her headphones. Barely. The atmospheric conditions are amplifying their signal strength by at least 300%. English, please. The weather is making their jamming super effective. Just like I told Commander Harrison. Ice's voice was tight. Well, we're here now. Do what you can. The next few minutes tested every skill Zoe had learned. Enemy jamming created false targets on her radar, making it impossible to tell real contacts from electronic ghosts. Communications between aircraft cut in and out. Even their navigation systems struggled to maintain satellite lock. But Zoe remembered the patterns she discovered. The jamming wasn't constant, it pulsed in predictable cycles. During the brief windows of reduced interference, she could get clear readings. Ice, I can give you targeting data during the gaps. You'll have maybe 3 seconds of clear information every 15 seconds. That's not much time. It's what we've got. They closed on the enemy formation, 12 bombers escorted by 8 fighters. Zoe counted them during a brief window of clear radar, then watched them disappear back into electronic static. Overlord, this is Ghost Rider. I count 20 enemy aircraft total. 12 bombers, 8 escorts. Ghost Rider, Overlord. We're only seeing 6 contacts on our screens. Confirm your count. Confirmed. The jamming is hiding half their formation from your radar. Ice fired the first missile during one of Zoe's targeting windows. The weapon flew true, taking out a Chinese fighter that the other F-35s couldn't even see on their displays. Good kill, Zoe called out. Target destroyed. But as they turned for another attack run, her threat warning system screamed. Missiles were incoming from multiple directions. Ice, we've got company. 4 missiles inbound. I don't see them on my display. Trust me. Brake left, now. Ice threw the F-35 into a violent turn just as enemy missiles streaked past their position. Flares and chaff deployed automatically, confusing the weapon's guidance systems. How did you see those missiles when I couldn't? Ice asked. I was monitoring the pulse pattern. During the jamming gaps, I can track everything for a few seconds. The battle raged for 20 minutes. Zoe guided Ice through attack after attack, calling out targets and threats that existed only in the brief windows of clear electronics. Other F-35 pilots relied on their own partially blinded systems, scoring fewer hits and taking more damage. Ghost Rider flight, this is Maverick 2-1. I'm hit and losing systems. Request immediate assistance. Zoe checked her displays. Maverick 2-1 was limping home on one engine, his electronics completely jammed. Enemy fighters were closing on his position. Ice, Maverick's in trouble. 2 fighters pursuing, bearing 090. I don't see them. Trust me. They're there. Ice banked toward the threatened aircraft. During the next jamming gap, Zoe locked onto both enemy fighters and guided missiles to their targets. 2 more kills. Maverick 2-1, you're clear. Head for home. But as they turned back toward the main battle, Zoe's blood ran cold. Her long-range sensors were picking up something new during the jamming windows, a massive formation of aircraft approaching from the south. Ice, we've got a problem. Big problem. Talk to me. There's another wave coming. At least 30 aircraft, maybe more. This whole engagement was a setup to draw us away from the carrier group. Ice's voice was deadly calm. You sure about that? Positive. They used the first wave to get us committed, then launched the real attack from a different direction. The carrier group is defenseless. Overlord, this is Ghost Rider. We have multiple contacts inbound from the south. Large formation, estimated 30+ aircraft. The carrier group is under immediate threat. Static filled the radio. Then, Ghost Rider, Overlord. We're not seeing any contacts from the south. Repeat, our screens are clear. Overlord, your radar is being jammed. I can only see them during brief windows when the interference drops. But they're out there, and they're heading straight for you. A long pause. Then Commander Harrison's voice came over the radio. Ghost Rider, this is actual. Are you certain of your contact report? Zoe keyed her microphone. Sir, this is Ghost Rider's electronic warfare officer. The atmospheric conditions are perfect for long-range jamming. They're using weather as a force multiplier, just like I briefed you this morning. The second wave is real, and they'll be in missile range of the carrier group in 12 minutes. Another pause. Zoe could almost hear Harrison's wheels turning as he weighed her credibility against the risk of being wrong. Finally, all aircraft, this is actual. RTB immediately. Repeat, return to base immediately. Prepare to defend the carrier group. The F-35s disengaged from the first wave of enemies and raced back toward the carrier. During the flight home, Zoe monitored the approaching threat, calling out updates during each jamming gap. 32 aircraft confirmed. Mix of fighters and anti-ship missile carriers. ETA to launch position 8 minutes. Can we intercept them in time? Ice asked. Zoe ran the numbers in her head. It's going to be close. Really close. As they approached the carrier group, Zoe could see other ships in the formation, destroyers, cruisers, support vessels. Thousands of sailors who had no idea what was coming their way. Ice, there's something else. The jamming pattern is changing. What do you mean? They're shifting frequencies, adjusting power levels. They know we've figured out their timing, so they're adapting. Ice banked toward the approaching threat, now visible as dark dots against the evening sky. Can you still track them? Zoe watched her instruments, looking for new patterns in the electronic chaos. I'm trying. Give me a minute. But they didn't have a minute. The enemy formation was already splitting up, some aircraft heading for the carrier while others targeted the escort ships. Missiles would start flying any second. Ice, whatever we're going to do, we need to do it now. The radio crackled with Harrison's voice. All aircraft, weapons free. Engage at will. The final battle was about to begin, and everything depended on Zoe's ability to see through the electronic storm that surrounded them. The enemy formation split like a deadly flower, aircraft peeling off in different directions toward their targets. Zoe watched her electronic displays flicker and dance as jamming signals crashed over them in waves. All aircraft, this is Ghost Rider's electronic warfare officer, she announced over the radio. I'm going to talk you through the interference. Follow my voice. Ice banked hard right, chasing a group of enemy fighters heading for the carrier. You sure about this, Montana? Trust me. Zoe closed her eyes and listened to the electronic noise flooding her headphones. Somewhere in that chaos were patterns, frequencies that pulsed, power levels that shifted, gaps that opened and closed like breathing. She'd grown up listening to ranch radios cut through mountain interference. This was the same thing, just louder and more dangerous. Maverick 2-3, enemy fighter bearing 085, range 4 miles. You'll have a firing solution in 3, 2, 1, now. Ghost Rider, Maverick 2-3. I see him. Fox 2, missile away. Good kill. Viper 1-1, missile carrier bearing 270, launching anti-ship missiles. Take him now. One by one, Zoe guided the squadron through the electronic storm. She called out targets invisible to their jammed radar systems, warned pilots about incoming missiles they couldn't see, coordinated attacks with the precision of a rancher directing cattle through a narrow gate. How is she doing this? Someone asked over the radio. Doesn't matter, Harrison's voice cut in. Keep following her guidance. ICE pulled their F-35 into a steep climb, chasing an enemy bomber that was lining up on one of the destroyers. Talk to me, Zoe. I need a shot. Zoe monitored the jamming frequencies, waiting for the pattern she'd learned to recognize. Steady, steady, mark. For 3 seconds, their targeting system locked onto the bomber with perfect clarity. ICE fired, and the missile found its target. Splash 1 bomber, ICE called out. Nice work, partner. But the battle was far from over. More enemy aircraft kept coming, and their jamming was adapting faster than before. Zoe realized they were analyzing her guidance calls, learning to counter her tactics in real time. ICE, they're figuring out what I'm doing. The jamming pattern is changing. Can you adapt? Zoe listened to the electronic noise, searching for new patterns. The enemy was shifting frequencies randomly now, trying to break the cycles she'd been exploiting. But randomness wasn't actually random, there were mathematical patterns underneath, like the way her father's old radio would skip channels during thunderstorms. Got it, she said. Different pattern, but still predictable. Razor 1-1, bandit at your 6 o'clock, closing fast. Brake left in 5 seconds. I don't see anything. Brake left now. Razor 1-1 turned just as an enemy missile streaked through the space where he'd been flying. The Chinese fighter that had fired it found himself perfectly positioned for a counterattack. Razor 1-1, reverse your turn. Target bearing 180, range 2 miles. Tally-ho! I see him now. Fox 2. Another enemy aircraft fell into the Pacific. For 30 minutes, the battle raged above the carrier group. Zoe's voice became the squadron's lifeline, guiding them through an electronic maze that would have been impossible to navigate alone. She coordinated attacks, warned of threats, and slowly helped them whittle down the enemy formation. Ghost Rider, this is Overlord. Enemy formation is withdrawing. Repeat, hostiles are breaking off and heading west. ICE leveled their aircraft and checked her fuel gauge. We did it. Yeah, Zoe said quietly. We did. The flight back to the carrier passed in exhausted silence. Zoe stared out at the Pacific, watching the sun set behind them. Her throat was raw from talking, her eyes burned from staring at instrument displays, and her hands shook from adrenaline. As they approached the carrier for landing, ICE's voice came over the intercom. You know what you did back there, don't you? My job. No, Montana. You did something nobody else could have done. You turned our biggest weakness into a strength. They trapped aboard the carrier as darkness fell. Zoe climbed down from the aircraft on unsteady legs, her flight suit soaked with sweat. Ground crew swarmed around Ghost Rider, checking for damage and refueling for the next mission. In the ready room, pilots filled out mission reports and debriefed with the intelligence officer. The mood was subdued but victorious. They'd faced overwhelming odds and won, but everyone knew it had been close. Commander Harrison walked over to where Zoe sat filling out her electronic warfare log. Mitchell. She looked up. Yes, sir. I owe you an apology. Your weather analysis this morning was correct. If you hadn't spotted that second wave, we would have lost ships today. Thank you, sir. Harrison sat down across from her. How did you coordinate those attacks through all that jamming? Zoe set down her pen. Back home, during thunderstorms, our ranch radio would get interference from the mountains. But if you listened carefully, you could still hear the important messages. The static had patterns, and the patterns had gaps. You treated military jamming like ranch radio interference. Same physics, sir. Just bigger and more complicated. Harrison shook his head. What you did today. I've never seen anything like it. You guided 12 aircraft through electronic warfare conditions that should have been impossible to penetrate. Other pilots had stopped their conversations to listen. Ice walked over and sat down next to Zoe. I've been flying for 10 years, Ice said. Never had an electronics officer who could do what you did today. Brooks, the pilot who'd called volunteers targets on Zoe's first day, approached their table. Mitchell, I owe you my life. That missile you warned me about would have taken my head off. Just doing my job, Zoe said. No, Brooks replied. You were doing everybody's job, and doing it better than any of us could have. Later that evening, Zoe stood on the carrier's flight deck under a sky full of stars. The Pacific stretched endlessly in every direction, dark water reflecting moonlight like scattered diamonds. She pulled out her phone and started typing an email to her parents. Dear Mom and Dad, she wrote. Today I finally understood why I'm here. It's not just about fixing electronics or following orders. It's about seeing patterns that others miss, and using that gift to keep people safe. She paused, looking up at the Big Dipper hanging low on the horizon. The same stars she'd watched from their ranch, now shining down on an aircraft carrier thousands of miles from home. The pilots here have started calling me their secret weapon, she continued typing. But the real secret is something you taught me years ago, that careful listening and patient observation can solve almost any problem. Whether it's a broken tractor radio or enemy jamming systems, the principle is the same. Footsteps approached across the flight deck. Johnson appeared beside her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Heard you missed dinner again, he said, handing her a cup. Thanks. Just needed some air. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars and listening to the endless sound of the carrier's engines. You know, Johnson said eventually, when you first got here, some people wondered if a ranch girl from Montana could handle this job. And now? Johnson smiled. Now they're wondering how we ever managed without you. Zoe finished her email and hit send. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new missions, new tests of everything she'd learned. But tonight, for the first time since leaving Montana, she felt completely at home. The vast Pacific no longer seemed foreign or threatening. Like the big sky country where she'd grown up, it was just another wide space that required careful navigation, patient observation, and the wisdom to listen for patterns in the noise. She was exactly where she belonged. Zoe's journey from a small Montana ranch to becoming the squadron's secret weapon shows us that our unique backgrounds and experiences are often our greatest strengths. If this story of courage, determination, and finding your place resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more inspiring military stories. I'd love to hear in the comments about times when your own background helped you succeed in unexpected ways.